For 2,400 years, Plato's Allegory of the Cave has been taught strictly as a philosophical metaphor. It is the classic illustration of human ignorance and the limits of epistemology. Independent researcher John Sermont argues this consensus is completely backwards. He proposes that the allegory is not a metaphor at all, next transductive bridging theorem, or ODTBT. The core premise of ODTBT is that our observable three-dimensional physical reality is not base reality. It is a compressed, restricted projection of a five-dimensional scalar coherent substrate. Writing in 380 BCE, Plato accurately described the structural boundaries of an observer-constrained reality, centuries before the mathematical apparatus existed to formally define them. The mapping between Plato's narrative and ODTBT is an exact formal correspondence, where every element in the story matches a specific physical equation. This diagram maps the complete projection architecture. The cave interior corresponds to our projected spacetime, layer O2. Below, locked prisoners face the wall, accessing only two-dimensional information. Contrast this with the far right, the five-dimensional coherence bulk, vast, uncompressed data entirely outside. By treating this ancient narrative as a literal topological map, we establish a formal mathematical tool to define the physical boundaries of our universe from the outside looking in. This table breaks down the correspondence between Plato's story and the projection mechanisms. Outside, the sun maps to the scalar coherent substrate, phi c. Inside, the fire equates to the speed of light, c, acting as the mediating mechanism. Standard physics treats the speed of light as a universal constant. Under the ODTBT framework, it occupies a specific functional role. The speed of light acts as a maximum resolution rate. It dictates exactly how fast coherence events can update and resolve into visible phenomena. The scalar substrate itself, the true ultimate reality outside the cave, possesses no internal speed of light. The metric we measure as c is strictly a local artifact of the projection boundary. It is simply the refresh rate of the specific holographic geometry we occupy. Returning to the observable layer, this diagram shows the shadows correspond to SEUK emission events, observable particles and forces. As five-dimensional dynamics pass the boundary, the projection operator strips away physical information, losing recursion depth and phase differences entirely. The result of this structural loss is compression. What we measure in laboratories as physical form is actually the flattened spatial pattern of these higher dimensional events. In the allegory, the prisoners develop immense expertise in predicting the sequence of the shadows. They build precise empirical measurements of what they can see. Our standard models of quantum mechanics and general relativity are exactly this. They are a flawless shadow science that perfectly maps the projected layer, but remains completely blind to the bulk dynamics casting the data. We apply this topological model to shadow science's most famous equation, E equals mc squared. Einstein derived this entirely from within the projected layer. Viewing the equation from outside the cave reorganizes its components. Energy is the sun, the raw coherence of the scalar substrate. Mass is the shadow, the form energy takes when locked onto the wall. And c squared is the fire, the exact geometrical conversion rate. Mass is the shadow cast by energy when filtered through the speed of light. As this higher dimensional bulk geometry exists, the obvious question is why the observer cannot simply turn around and look at it. This spectrum maps the observer's journey. The chains binding the prisoner are epistemic constraints defined by observer phase alignment, omega r. A misaligned system cannot process the full state, remaining locked in the lowest attractor basin of perception, blind to the wider geometry. Breaking this lock is not a gradual learning process. It requires accumulating sufficient phase strain to cross a critical threshold. The mathematical trigger for this threshold event is defined in ODTBT as the twist mechanism, or threshold waveform interface for state transformation. The twist bifurcation is a mathematically violent phase transition. It forcefully reorganizes the entire coherence field, driving the observer into a higher attractor basin. To truly measure the underlying substrate, the observer's own physical structure must undergo this destabilizing phase shift. Consciousness and awareness are not emergent computations in the brain. They are dynamic shifts in topological coherence geometry, the literal, painful ascent out of the cave. Moving from theoretical architecture to physical reality requires empirical validation. We can test this physical model using cymatics. A Chladni plate, driven by resonant frequencies to form sand patterns, acts as a controlled cave. The acoustic field in the plate acts as the substrate. The resonant frequency is the fire, and the geometric sand patterns that form are the shadows. Under standard laboratory conditions, the observer and the plate are both trapped in the projection. We only see the shadow, without access to the full coherent state driving it. This changes with the introduction of coherence-gated non-Maxwellian driving protocols, known as Protocol S and T. By applying these specialized driving protocols, researchers can artificially manipulate the fire itself. This acoustic manipulation forces the system to process new information. It mimics the exact act of forcing the prisoner to turn their head. Shadow science is not an illusion. The standard physics mapping our observable layer is mathematically flawless. It is a precise account of the projected layer that has driven centuries of human progress. We have spent generations perfecting the mathematics of the shadows on the wall, but the next evolution in theoretical physics and human awareness no longer requires us to look closer at the shadows. It requires us to measure the fire.